We're going to talk about how to build your own hurricane survival kit, hurricane preparedness kit. We're going to start off with just strictly the criteria that's listed on the FEMA website, as we'll use that as a framework for the bare minimum of things that you need. Supplementing that where I think is necessary, and then we'll finish the video with what we've learned after having been in Florida for a couple of hurricanes, what's been nice to have, what we wished we would have had on previous hurricanes. We've got a lot to cover, try to go through it quickly, and in the comments or in the description I'll leave a outline of the things we're covering if you would like to skip ahead to the different portions of the video. Starting with water, it's the most important thing to have. According to the FEMA website, you need 1 gallon per person per day minimum. If you're staying in place, sheltering in place, you need 2 weeks worth. If you're evacuating, you need 3 days worth. Obviously 1 gallon per person per day is a lot of water, and this could potentially take a lot of storage space. But a couple options for storing water: these bigger cubes. This will hold 6 gallons of water. It's convenient. It's got the little spout. You can stack those, and like I said, they'll hold 6 gallons. These different different form factor, obviously a little skinnier, maybe easier to grab with different sets of grab handles. Not as easy to use because it just has the pour spout, but in terms of stacking up, once again, 6 gallons of water. If you get a bunch of these, then that can add up quick. You can also just do as basic as the single gallon water jugs. And then lastly, these are convenient just for personal use. Water cases, bare minimum, I'd say for like an absolute dire situation, survival situation. Maybe you can get away with 4 bottles per person per day, but realistically, probably be smart to have opportunity to use at least 8 bottles per person per day. So that could obviously run you out of these cases fairly quickly. If you've only got 24 bottles in this case and you're trying to use 8 per person per day, then that's only good for 1 person for 3 days. If you have access to water though, and whether it's drinkable or not, then obviously that makes it a little easier. However, prior experience, a lot of times after a hurricane comes through, contamination to the water main, and then your neighborhood gets put on a boil water notice. So as long as you have a way of boiling water, then you can rely on that. If you don't, there are ways to filter the water other ways, as long as you have the supplies that you need. Finishing up the storage solutions though, you can also stack up the Nalgene bottles, shaker bottles, whatever other vessels of carrying water that you have. Nesting stuff like this is convenient because if you're doing a smaller portion of water that you need to boil, it obviously doesn't take up a whole lot more space if you can nest the Nalgene with a stainless steel cup, and you can boil water out of that. Also, we talked about in previous videos, these water bladders, emergency drinking water for lifeboat survival rations. Those are good for 5 years before they need to be replaced, and it's an easy way to stack a bunch of them, an easy grabable location, like a little pouch like that. But if you're on a boil water notice, it's a lot easier to boil larger quantities of water in a bigger pot with a lid. It's more efficient, and you can just do more water at once. It's obviously going to take a little longer. It'd be ideal to have your working gas range in your house. If you're stuck with an electric range, then unless you have a camp stove or a barbecue grill, it's going to be tough to boil water. So if you're stuck with filtering water instead of boiling it, you've got chemical and mechanical filtration. Chemical, stuff like this, chlorine dioxide, 2-part solution. This will do 30 gallons per package. It's pretty good. This is a smaller portion, like personal single dose water purification tablets. These don't leave nearly as much of an aftertaste as the iodine tablets do, but they are a little bit more expensive. So that's some of the basic chemical filtration. Mechanical filtration, if you're doing, once again, personal use, life straws are convenient. Will filter out a lot of the contaminants according to the package. 99.999% of protozoa and 99.99999% of bacteria. Good for 1,000 gallons. and as long as you're keeping them clear of larger debris, it's a good way of purifying your drinking water straight out of a cup or whatever potentially contaminated water source you have. It's just not very easy to store the water after it's gone through the filtration media. The easiest way by far to filter larger quantities of water is with something like this Berkey. It'll do about 2 gallons in the bottom storage portion. It's really easy to use. It's got a couple big filters in the top, activated carbon filters. So you just pour water in the top, and then the water will slowly trickle through the filters. I think each filter is good for 5,000 gallons and 2 years of use before it needs to be replaced. You can put additional filters in so you get more storage or quicker filtration capability and overall more filtering capacity. So whatever contaminated water source you have, you can pour straight into here, set it and forget it, and then you've got as much water as you'd like, as long as it can keep up with your needs for your family. So this is basic. I think they recommend this for families up to 4. They're a little expensive, but it's hard to beat the convenience of something like the Berkey. There are some other brands of mechanical filtration media like this. Like there's a Sawyer Mini, which is a little bit easier to use and store water out of afterwards, because they got a little water bladder and you can squirt the water into something else. But once again, it's hard to beat the convenience of the Berkey. As far as supplementing your water, you can use things like the little squirt flavor for either caffeine or just the flavor. These are good for replenishing electrolytes. You can use these similar to Pedialyte, emergency hydration electrolyte replacement. Little pouches. They don't taste bad, and it's a good way of, if you're dehydrated, getting yourself hydrated more quickly than drinking plain water would. Also, if you need coffee but don't have time to make it or don't have the ability to make it, this is better than nothing. Little Folgers instant coffee packets. And then if you need to start a fire because you're boiling water, if you're out of electricity because your electrical lines are cut or a tree fell on them, or your neighborhood is out of electricity, which is very common in a post-hurricane situation, then having a way to light your stove would be convenient. Obviously, if your gas range normally is electrically lit and you don't have electricity, unless you have a way of lighting the fire, whether that's a lighter, a Bic lighter, or matches, waterproof matches, stormproof matches, that'd be nice to have. If your gas range needs electricity just to open the gas valve, then you're stuck either using propane tanks out of like a camp stove, like the Coleman camp stove, or if you have spare propane, to just use your barbecue grill. As long as you've got a spare tank of propane, that's an option as well. Right, next on FEMA's list is food. Similar situation with the water. According to the website, their FEMA website, you need to have also enough food for each person in your family for 3 days if you're evacuating, and 2 weeks if you're sheltering in place. So depending on how many calories you need per day will determine how much food you need. Definitely recommend raiding your pantry and fridge, starting with your fridge so you can take advantage of all the perishable stuff before it goes bad. If you're without electricity for extended periods of time, expect all of the stuff in your fridge and freezer to eventually go bad. The longer you can keep the doors closed, the cooler it will stay. If you can boost the shelf life of this stuff by actually running your refrigerator off of a generator, then that would be ideal, but not everyone has access to a generator. So talk through some of the easy, convenient, low prep food, non-perishable stuff. So everything on here is pretty easy to use, fairly healthy, and non-perishable. So start with canned goods. You should have a decent stock of this in your fridge. Tomato-based stuff is always really easy, and you'll get your daily serving of vegetables. You can make pasta sauce, all sorts of different stuff with tomatoes. Beans, all sorts of different varieties. You get a decent amount of fiber and calories and protein. Obviously rice goes well with beans, and it's a cheap, easy way of getting a complete protein. You got your carbs and you got your protein. More varieties of beans. These are a lot more convenient than dried beans, and they also don't require any additional water, but they don't have as long of a shelf life, and they're not as easy to pack a ton of supply as like a massive bag of dried beans. Dried beans don't have the longest shelf life until you start supplementing or extending the shelf life by using things like oxygen absorbing packets in either vacuum sealed Mylar bag or mason jars like this. I will eventually make a video on how to do this. It's super easy. Honestly, it's a really compact way of doing. I have it set up so that it's 14 days per person worth of oatmeal, spaghetti noodles, beans, rice, and everything's labeled with when I packed it. And as you can see, it stores pretty well, pretty dense, and as long as you have water, then you'll be able to, with one person, survive for a full 14 days with each one of these things. But like I said, I'll cover that in the future. These are convenient too. They're just a little salty. It's pretty hard to beat the convenience of like making a full meal off the mountain house. Like camping food, all you do is you boil some water, follow the instructions after removing the oxygen absorbing packet, and then it's a full meal. Chicken, rice, beef stroganoff. I got all sorts of different flavors. It's a little bit expensive, and like I said, it's a little salty, but it's a good way to get a bunch of calories, complete meal, and it tastes pretty good. If you're going to be cooking, obviously have all of the supplies you need: spices, hot sauce, whatever hot sauce you like, salt, pepper, hot sauce, olive oil. Have everything you need to cook. Obviously the ingredients for the meal you're trying to make out of either your refrigerator, your freezer, or your pantry. And then definitely have a way of cleaning up afterwards. If you're without electricity, you're probably going to be without your dishwasher, so dish soap, towels, paper towels. You have to stock up on that kind of stuff. And then MREs, or the individual portions and components of MREs, like these little peanut butter packets. These are tasty, high calorie, good protein, do not require any sort of prep, and it's a long-term survival solution. So it'll last for years on the shelf, as long as they're kept in reasonable temperature ranges. Another way to get a ton of calories in addition to rice and oatmeal, that kind of stuff, is these instant mashed potatoes. Little individual serving packets. We'll do 4 servings at 110 calories each. And they taste pretty good. They have a much longer shelf life than normal potatoes do. You can also stock up on bigger boxes like this. We'll do 18 servings with this at around the same calorie count. If your food's gonna be pretty bland and basic, especially very likely to be the case towards the back end of the 2 weeks that you're potentially preparing for, then having a multivitamin to supplement the variety in your diet that you would normally get that you're no longer getting would probably be smart to have that. Instant oatmeal packets are convenient. They just don't have as long as a shelf life as packing oatmeal into a vacuum sealed, oxygen or removed storage container. These have a decent shelf life, baby food. It's a good way to get both vegetables and fruits, and most of them taste pretty good. Almond butter or peanut butter packets, those are convenient for stowing in smaller storage compartments, but it's hard to beat the value of just straight up normal peanut butter. This is kind of like a survival food, because with how many calories, how much protein, and how little space this takes up, this is good for 34 servings at 190 calories per serving and 7 grams of protein each. So peanut butter is a good way to boost your food capacity. I talked about Cliff Bars before. Those are convenient. Trail mix, good way to get some calories, decent quality as far as health. These are super convenient. So if you get the big old bag of protein powder, then this will do 80 servings at 120 calories per serving and 24 grams of protein. So if you're doing diet very high in carbs, potatoes, rice, it's a good way of getting an entire half of your daily value of protein do 2 of these per day, and that's basically, according to nutrition facts, it's 100% of your daily value of protein in just this. Just need 1 scoop, and depending on how thick you want it to be, mix it with water, or if you have milk, you can mix it with milk. Also sell them in these individual packs, so that's good for like a go bag. Each one's a full scoop worth, pre-mixed, and decent storage life. If you're going to be using protein powder, you definitely need to, if you haven't before, you need to rinse out the bottle you're drinking out of. It's going to get pretty funky. Once again, all of the material to start the fire in case you are actually cooking or boiling water in order to make some of the survival foods or rehydrate the potatoes or the rice or the beans or the oatmeal. And a couple other things to talk about. You can also make these handy little survival food packets. It's easy to store these cardboard boxes. They got some protein powder, got some Gatorade powder, and then these survival bars. Each of these is 410 calories or 400 calories. It's technically just like survival food. Not the best tasting, but once again, super dense source of getting the calories you need and then supplementing it with protein in your drink. A couple other things to talk about. If you've got pets, definitely make sure you have enough food for them. These are convenient for like on the go, but just make sure you have enough dog food if you've got dogs, enough cat food if you've got cats, that you are not running out in the middle of some sort of natural disaster situation. Another really convenient thing to have is these just straight up survival food boxes. You can get them in crates or cases or little kind of like ammo crates like this. As you see, per person, entire week supply of emergency food. They are decent tasting, a little high in salts, but you can supplement them if you are completely stocked up and your neighbor isn't. This is a really good way of just giving your neighbor an entire week's worth of emergency food if you have the means to do that. So you just hand them this. You can have instructions on how to make it. You can have a little inventory list of what's in here. Obviously, as long as they've got enough water to make this food, this will last them an entire week. Maybe give them a knife or utensils, fork, spoon, a couple little protein powder packets, a longer spoon, because a lot of these pouches that you're supposed to eat out of are a little taller, and it'd be nice to have a longer spoon so your hand's not constantly in the food. Some of these MRE chocolate peanut butter spreads are good and high in calories, and then just stuff up the extra space with emergency drinking water. You can supplement with little hot sauce Tabasco packets, but below that, well, in addition, just like some Spam. It's a good way to get a bunch of protein. It's dense. It's 6 servings, 180 calories per serving at 7 grams of protein per serving. You can add that to really any of these additional survival meals for a little bit better taste. You get the low sodium versions that helps cut down on the overall sodium content, and it's a good way to get more of a complete protein. But yeah, below that is just the actual survival packs. They do have instructions on here on how to make it. It tells you what the serving size is, the nutrition information, and how to make it. Those are very convenient. And then the last thing, it's almost not worth talking about, but the top ramen and instant lunch type stuff, they're so high in salt and they're so inefficient with just like the nutrition that you actually need for long term. It's potentially a way to supplement the food that you need, but definitely not a good base starting point. So I do not recommend that kind of stuff. Next on the list is flashlights. Probably a couple flashlights for each member of your family. If you've ever lost your only flashlight at night, it's obviously, you'll know what I mean when I say it's nice to have a couple spares. All sorts of different styles of flashlights. Probably a good idea to have a mixture of everything. The small little convenient ones, LED obviously is bright and pretty energy efficient, so I'd recommend going LED where you can. The mag lights double as both a very strong flashlight, but also a protection, self-defense device if you want to use it that way. Utility lights we talked about before. Lanterns, is a good way to light up the entirety of at least sections of your house. These can be pretty bright, and obviously 360-degree lighting as opposed to more of a spotlight on a torch like this. Headlamps are good if you're working with your hands and you need to see a small portion of area lit. The work lights, however, you can use it for security purposes. If you have access to electricity, you can plug that in and point it to a section of your yard if you'd like it to be very well illuminated. Otherwise, if you're working in a basement or a portion of your house where you do not have electricity but you need light and you have access to some sort of electricity, like a generator, and not into the normal electric circuit of the house, then it's a great way of getting a ton of light into a somewhat more spread out area. You can also get USB rechargeable lights. So instead of having to replace AA's or AAA's, whether that's with a standard normal battery or the rechargeable batteries, these USB rechargeable lanterns are pretty handy too. Just plug that into a USB charger, and it's got torch mode and it's got a lantern mode. You can hang that from somewhere in your house and get some light down around the direction it's pointing. I'll show you the amount of charge left. And Goal Zero stuff, it's cool. It's pretty high tech, it's just a little expensive. The next thing on the list is a battery powered radio. So with access to weather radio, ideally. This is battery powered, but also you can hand crank it to extend the battery life. It's also backs up as a flashlight, and then radio tuning here. Probably a good idea to have a couple of these in case one breaks. It's pretty cheap and handy. The next thing on the list is batteries, so easy segue from flashlights and radios to batteries. If you're going to go standard normal battery, obviously stock up on those. You don't want to run out of batteries and not be able to turn your flashlights or electrical equipment back on. Or you can invest in rechargeable batteries as long as you have a way of accessing electricity in order to use the recharger and recharge the batteries. That's a long-term solution for if you have access to power, continually keeping things charged and being able to use your flashlight for extended periods of time. Once again, the Goal Zero version of it, this doubles as a flashlight. You can charge it off of USB, and you can have a USB out as well, so you can charge things like your phone off of these 4 rechargeable AA's. They're not as energy dense as something like a actual dedicated phone or iPad charging brick. These smaller ones like this will maybe do 1 full recharge on the newer iPhones. Bigger ones, depending on how many milliamp hours you're buying, obviously the more you spend, the more capacity you have, and these bigger ones will do a couple full recharges. You can also use your car battery, plug in as long as your car has either a cigarette lighter with a conversion to USB or just a straight up USB port. You can charge your phone off of your car. Take a lot for it to completely drain the battery out, so as long as the car's running, the car should be recharging off the alternator, so don't completely kill your car battery by running too many watts through an inverter or too many phones recharging without at least starting the car and having it run to at least have a chance of keeping up on the charge. Straight out of the FEMA guide list though, if you have access to electricity, it'd be a good idea to have just a normal phone charger, as long as you can plug it into the wall or someone's generator or your own generator. After a hurricane, it takes a little while for the sun to clear out enough to use things like this little solar charger kit. You find these on Amazon. If you have access to clear sun, clear the clouds, then these solar chargers got a pretty handy way of plugging right into a USB port so that you can charge your phone as long as you have access to the sun. Packs down pretty tight and pretty durable little container that comes in. You can also run things like the battery charger through the solar charger, and then you have a way of also charging your AA's if you have no other means of doing it. I'd say that the portable jumper that we've talked about before also constitutes a battery backup, especially if you're using your car to power things like an inverter or charging phone. If you run yourself out of battery on your car, you don't have access to another vehicle or jumper cables, as long as this is charged, should be able to jump your car to the point where you can get it running. You can get the battery recharging itself and hopefully not set yourself up for that situation again. I think the reason that the 100-hour candles, survival candles, didn't make it on the list is because it's potentially too easy to cause a fire in your house if you're falling asleep with these things lit. They can be handy in a pinch, but they are not on the list. Not on FEMA's list, at least. Next on FEMA's list is first aid. It's a bare minimum, at least have one of these home first aid kits. They're pretty basic. It's got most of the type of supplies you'll need for most household emergencies, accidents. But that's just a starting point, because I really like the utility of these bigger, like business-centric first aid kits. First of all, you can mount it to a wall, so it can be fairly easy to stow in a closet with the little mounting points. But it's also very well laid out, very easy to replace the components of. Typically have a pretty basic little first aid guide in there. But as far as like reordering things that either expire or you run out of, you just pull these little boxes out and you order straight off of the item number along the side. It's got things like aspirin, extra strength non-aspirin tablets, ibuprofen, first aid tape, CPR face shield, and nitrile exam gloves, and then 2 more pairs of nitrile exam gloves, antibiotic ointment, burn aid, and first aid burn cream. Conforming gauze roll, a 3-inch version compared to the 2-inch version. Triangular sling bandage, tweezers, scissors, antiseptic towelettes, alcohol cleanse and wipe, fabric bandages, plastic bandages, butterfly wound closures, fingertip bandages, knuckle fabric bandages, and patch bandages. Also trauma pads, sterile gauze, smaller packs of sterile gauze. Like I said, very easily to find the things you need, very well laid out. Doesn't take up a ton of space, and you can usually find a pretty good deal on this stuff too. It's also a good way to supply a homemade first aid kit. So eventually I'll make a video on building like a really serious first aid kit like that. It's a little too much to cover in this video, just kind of rushing through all the topics to get everything covered in a reasonable amount of time. But big old first aid kit in a bright color, hard to miss, everything you could possibly need in that. Especially if you can supplement it with the other smaller first aid kits. If you are going to be limited access to hospitals, emergency rooms, doctors, and you have restricted access to cell phone service or the internet, which is very likely going to be the case immediately after or during a hurricane, then having a paper version of, this is very basic, you can get these in a lot of the Adventure Medical Kit first aid kits. It's pretty basic, obviously pretty small. It's better than nothing, but it's hard to beat this. I think it's like $40 on Amazon, Survival Medicine Handbook. It's 600 pages of very well explained and well thought out survival medicine in case you absolutely need it in a pinch. Next thing on the list is prescription medication. Don't let yourself run out of, I'd say, bare minimum of a week, but ideally a 2-week supply of any sort of prescription medication that you need. Do not let the supply get that low, and keep yourself well stocked up in case of a situation like this where you don't have a way of replenishing the important medication that you have prescribed to you. Next thing on FEMA's list, and I don't necessarily agree with this, is better than nothing, but they're saying a basic multi-tool is sufficient. I would say that's definitely not the case. If you are going to be boarding your windows, you obviously need an actual toolkit. Whether you're doing it with nails, you need a hammer and nails. If you're doing it with a screwdriver or with screws, you need a screw gun. That's just bare minimum. If you're going to be doing potential like interim repairs to your house or property, you obviously need the tools to be able to do that. If you are not going to have sufficiently charged batteries or a way to access electricity, then you're not going to be able to use electric power tools. If you do have access to a generator, it makes all of this so much easier. Or if you have enough batteries stocked up that you have a reasonable life expectancy of your electric power tools. But carrying case like this, if you don't have one already, it's a good way of saving money on all of the tools you might potentially need. It's got stuff like a drill, a cordless impact, circular saw, reciprocating saw with spare blades, and then obviously all these extra storage pouches where you can put your spare bits, drill bits, spare blades. If you don't have access to electricity or you don't stock up on your batteries or keep them charged, then you're going to be stuck using hand tools. So if you're cutting plywood to board up a window that's broken, then you're going to be using hammer and nails. Otherwise, if you had access to electricity, I recommend these construction screws. You don't need to do the 2 separate steps of drilling first and then screwing in afterwards, because it's got a built-in little drill tip, easy to use. It's also a Torx bit, so it does a better job of not stripping out compared to like a Phillips. I'd say a 2-inch version is bare minimum. You obviously get more per box the smaller you go, but you need thick enough to get through the plywood and to the wood that you're screwing into behind it. If you are cutting down a tree that's fallen onto your house, property, or car, you don't have access to power tools, then you're going to be using a bow saw. These are obviously, you need to be careful with using them. Be a good idea to have some spare blades, but at least having one is the bare minimum there. If you have the means and the space to store it, you can go with chainsaw. There's pros and cons to getting a gas chainsaw as opposed to electric. Electric, you need enough batteries to not run yourself out of the capability to finish whatever job you started, but electric is quieter. You just need to have a way of charging these big old batteries. I like the Cobalt brand stuff. Regardless of which type of chainsaw you use, you're going to need, if you're doing small jobs, you're going to need a little bit of bar and saw chain lubricant. Otherwise, you're doing big jobs, and you need a big jug of it. The convenience of electrical chainsaws beats the gas hands down. Comparable bar lengths, you can argue that the electric has enough power to keep up with most smaller gas saws, especially for more of like household type of jobs. However, it's impossible to be the convenience of an electric saw, because with gas, you not only need gas, but you need to have lubricant added to the gas. And ideally, you're also adding some sort of stabilizer for the ethanol. Ethanol's not good for the engine or any of the seals or components inside the fuel system. So you're gonna need gas, and you're gonna need the actual 2-cycle oil, and you're gonna have to measure this out appropriately for your type of saw. And ideally, you also have something like this for your ethanol treatment stabilizer. This will do 20 gallons, so that's plenty. It's not a huge container, obviously, that's plenty. And this will do 5 gallons of gas. However, if you are stuck with going gas, yes, it is much more likely that you'll be able to extend the use if you run out of electricity. But this is a decent way of having a pre-mixed ethanol-free, ready to go out of the bottle 2-stroke fuel for gas-powered chainsaws. You can definitely look into different chainsaw videos, but I'd say an 18-inch bar is probably sufficient for most of the jobs you're gonna be doing at home. So we're getting a little sidetracked here talking about chainsaws. Just to finish this topic before we go back to the actual FEMA list, in order to finish being prepared for everything you need for a chainsaw, you need the chainsaw bar tool. So being able to tighten and loosen the chain, because unless you want to file and sharpen the blade after it dulls out, it's definitely a good idea to have some spare chains for the appropriate size bars that you have. And then last thing for chainsaws is hearing protection, gloves, and safety glasses. You definitely need all of that when working with a chainsaw if you have never used a chainsaw before. So, got a little sidetracked talking about chainsaws, but back to the list. According to FEMA, the only thing you need is a multi-tool. Like I said, argue that's not the case, and that is definitely not going to be enough for most jobs, but it's better than nothing. Next thing that they recommend is sanitation, personal hygiene items. So that's pretty easy. Just things like paper towels, toilet paper, baby wipes. These come in super handy. Soap, hand sanitizer, both dish soap and hand soap. You're potentially going to be showering out of a bucket, so keep that in mind. And that one's pretty easy as long as you know what you need. Don't forget toothbrush, toothpaste, floss, all of the normal personal hygiene items that you're not going to have access to until stores start to open back up. Next is copies of your medication list, pertinent medical information, proof of your address, your deed, and your lease of your home. As appropriate, passports, birth certificate, and insurance policies. All that stuff in a fireproof safe. Obviously, it's protected from falling damage, protected from fire. It's waterproof. If you need to get out of the house quickly, this is an easy way of grab the handle, take it with you. I'm not going to go into what's actually in there in addition to that, but maybe things like personal protective equipment, spare car keys, expensive jewelry, other things that you would like to not lose should probably go in something like this. Next couple things on there, cell phone charger and battery backup. It's pretty easy stuff to potentially forget. If you're used to having electricity and you're used to just always charging your phone every single night, then having at least a way of extending that use, whether you plug it into your car. So much of our life now is obviously based on phone use, so make sure you have a way of keeping that thing charged. Family emergency contact information. If you have a way to charge your phone, then you should be able to access all that through your phone, but if not, then probably be a good idea to have it written down somewhere that you can access it. Once again, good idea to put that in a safe like this. You can also take pictures of your family member in case you lose one, and you know, or you can point people in the direction of like who to look for based on showing them a picture of your family member. Try to have it be up to date, current, because that can definitely help. You can also keep extra cash. Extra cash is the next thing on the list. You can keep that in the safe. Probably start off with small bills. It's easier to break small bills than big bills, but build up a decent, maybe 2-week supply of cash. Whatever that means to you is completely personal preference. And the last thing on the list is extra fuel. So if you are going to be driving, potentially evacuating, it'd be a good idea to have no less than a half tank of gas during hurricane season so that you're not one of the people showing up at the gas station within a couple days before the hurricane shows up, buying out all the gas, and then stuck with no gas to buy anywhere in town. So if you can, before hurricane season starts, fill up a couple of gas cans, add some stable to it. This will give you an extra, I think full 12 months, 24 months of use out of gas that normally does not last nearly that long without a fuel stabilizer added like this. This small little bottle will do 20 gallons of gas, 4 or 5 gallon jugs before you need to buy another one of these things. And that should be able to get you plenty of gas in addition to whatever you already have in your tank to get out of town. Also, it does work as an ethanol stabilizer, so you can add it to your gas if you're going to be supplementing either your own or your neighbor's generator. Obviously, gas is somewhat flexible, whether that's referring to portable generator use or car use. But regardless, having spare on hand and not being stuck without a way of buying gas within days or hours of the hurricane showing up is the best way to be prepared with that. If you don't have access to a generator but your neighbor does, and you have a way of extending their generator runtime by giving them extra gas, that's obviously potentially a good trade. As long as you show up with the gas and a extension cord, it should be a pretty good way of sharing electricity with a neighbor who is fortunate enough to have a generator, if they do, and you may or may not. Probably a good idea to have a splitter, and then this thicker gauge long run wire if you're going to be running a extension cable all the way from your neighbor's house to your house. Definitely need to go with the thicker, heavier duty exterior use. Electric cable if you're powering high voltage or high watt equipment like refrigerators, freezers, if you're doing like a window mounted air conditioner unit. You obviously need more electricity capability with a heavier gauge extension cord. Splitters, pretty basic. Try not to overload them too much, so you're gonna quickly run out of capacity on whatever generator that you're pulling all this power from. So we have finished the list of FEMA recommended hurricane preparedness kit items. From here, we're just gonna right back to the segue we had previously of tools. So a lot of the tools that you're going to need realistically in some sort of post or pre-hurricane situation is tree removal equipment, whether that's smaller trees, branches, either shears or pruners. I'm partial to the Corona brand stuff. It's good quality. You can obviously get a lot of torque out of these things. And then the extendable arms are convenient too. You can compact it down for easier storage, but then you can also get a little more clamping force, cutting force by extending the arms out like that. If you have the means to store and buy a chainsaw, those are obviously handy if you know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're either using a bow saw like we talked about earlier, or things like hatchet, axes. Big old mauls like this are handy if you know what you're doing. So that's the basics of like tree removal equipment, and then the other half of tools, contractor tools that you'll potentially need in a post or pre-hurricane situation are things to cut lumber, cut plywood, to fasten plywood to windows, 2x4s to window frames. So like we talked about already, power tools are ideal, but you can always back it up with old-fashioned hand tools, whether that's a hammer and nails. Just make sure you have that on hand in case you need it. Or the screws to go along with your screw gun. I'd argue that a tarp and duct tape quantifies as tools. Tarps will definitely sell out, just like gas will in the hours or days prior to a hurricane showing up. So if you can have those stocked up, it's better than not having them and needing them. In a pinch, the contractor trash bags can work, double as a tarp, just not going to cover nearly as much surface area, but the heavy duty stuff is handy. And then as far as the cleanup afterwards, definitely need trash bags. Clean up all the leaves, brush, all the other trash that's potentially shown up in your yard after a hurricane. Ropes can be handy for all sorts of different things before or after the hurricane, so maybe stock up on some of that. You're working with your hands, gloves, safety glasses. I'd argue that this is a tool that just needs to be in your home preparedness kit regardless of if there's a hurricane or not. Better to have this and not need it than need it and not have it. Another thing, if you're working with your hands, maybe some shop towels. You can double as just a normal paper towel if you need it. If you run out of normal paper towels, but they're heavy duty and they're good for outdoor work, outdoor tasks, especially if you're working on your car. Another tool probably be a 5-gallon bucket. You stock up on these, all sorts of different uses, but big one, hurricane centric, is if your roof starts leaking and you need a way to catch a bunch of water. 5-gallon bucket will obviously hold 5 gallons. So there's a lot more than most pots and pans will. If your house is so damaged that it is not safe to be living inside of anymore, and you do not have a neighbor that you can go to until your house can be repaired, then it'd probably be smart to have a tent or at least emergency shelter kit, so that if you're stuck houseless until your home can be repaired, it'd be nice to have that. So the last thing to talk about with tools would be, if you don't really know what you're doing, don't have access to YouTube or the internet in general, home repair kit book is invaluable. We'll end here on these last couple items. This is kind of more situation specific depending on personal beliefs or your personal family situation. If you'd like a way to protect yourself or your home, maybe having something like this to protect yourself if you need it. Otherwise, if not, then have a way of calling for help at least. If you have a baby, then stocking up on formula while you're without electricity or access to formula would be a smart decision. And then this is more up the alley of like survival gear for like backpacking or being away from your house, but it's potentially a good backup. Have it stored in an ammo can because it's pretty stinky straight out of the package, but they are pretty handy. These little solid fuel, combustible, solid survival camp stove, pocket stove. They are from a company called Esbit. They're typically packed with some spare fuel in addition to the stove itself. And each one's maybe good to like heat a container that size to boiling if you needed it. It's pretty compact. It unfolds, and then you just place the little packet down on the burning pad, light it, and then rest your item on top. Like I said, they stink, so if you can store it in an airproof container, that would be ideal. We've got all sorts of different sizes. They got spare fuel. You can obviously stock up on that. This bigger version, pocket stove, obviously for a bigger pot. And if you're doing smaller, don't need to go to boiling just to warm, you can get the smaller ones. These are 4 grams each, whereas the normal size is 14 grams each.